All right. All right. This is Infosec Decoded 59 camera glasses. And we're starting with Alan, who has Russian cybercrime.
Russian cybercrime and CrowdStrike has released one of their annual threat reports, and it's quite impressive. There are a lot of takeaways from this threat report. Never mind the Russian cybercrime aspect, although I'll get to that in a second. Some of the big pieces of news is that according to CrowdStrike and their detection tools, so mind you, this is dependent on the effectiveness of their tools, which may or may not be very effective. A lot of adversaries are using a lot less malware. And according to them, 68% of the detections were malware free.
Well, I believe that. I've quit using malware. You don't really need to use malware.
Well, I try not to get involved with malware at all personally, but apparently a lot of the adversaries of the world just don't touch the stuff now. They don't need it. They're not using it. There's no malware for them.
Yeah, it's like training wheels. It's a crutch.
Yeah.
That's same with me. I used to use malware, and then you learn how to do it right. You knock it off.
Yeah. So the adversaries of the world are getting more sophisticated, just like you, Sam.
Yeah.
Also, China, North Korea, and Iran are the top state-sponsored groups out there. So they're the most active.
Not Russia.
Well, no, not Russia. And I'll get to Russia in just a second here. Third, that there's been a major uptick in the activity targeting the telecommunications industry. So telcos have always been popular, but now they're getting to be especially popular for whatever reasons. Cryptojacking has become very, very popular. I mean, it's always been popular, but it's been seen a 100% increase in activity.
Is that crypto miners?
Well, yes, essentially.
Oh, I've always wondered why that would work. I didn't think an ordinary machine could mine enough to be worth any money, but anyway.
And then initial access brokers are also doing really, really well. So in the economic system of threat adversaries, access brokers are really raking in the money, and they're becoming more and more important than ever. Now, the last part of this is that Russia appears to have considerably changed its methods, and so now it appears that not only is Russia very, very active, of course, but Russia is hiding behind, shall we say, a front of threat actors. So it's harder to attribute these attacks to Russian state sponsored hackers, but they are instead sponsored. They are sponsored by Russia, but they aren't necessarily the GRU or the FSB. And so attribution is more challenging.
Well, you can attribute it to the nation, but not directly to the government.
Right, not directly to the government.
Yeah, well, I think effectively these people operate under letters of marque. They're given a green light by the government.
Yes.
Yeah, well, all right. Well, that's good stuff. And then I've got one I thought was amazing. Electric airplanes. They're talking about doing something about the carbon pollution from airplanes. And I've often said, electric airplanes are clearly a non-starter because of the weight of the batteries. But that is apparently not true. Apparently, the engines are a considerable part of the weight of airplanes, and gasoline engines are heavier than electric engines. So these people are actually making working electric airplanes because they say they can save so much weight on the engine that it's enough to provide for the weight of the batteries. And they're trying to make passenger airplanes with more efficient engines, and they have various prototypes going. And they say that just like electric cars, they benefit greatly from the fact that they can just use 90% of the existing technology for the airplanes. All they're changing is the engine. So apparently electric planes are coming, which is news to me.
Now, I'm interested in the name of this company. It's called Wright, but is this the original Wright, Curtis Wright, or is this some new startup that just licensed the name?
Well, I don't know. I didn't see anything about that. I assume it's just some new startup. I assume they're imitating Tesla.
Yeah, yeah.
Just naming themselves after a famous early inventor.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And Irvin's got SSDs that detect malware. How does that work?
So this is still being researched and tried, but they're trying to get ransomware detection on the SSD. So when it starts to see that there's a lot of writing that wasn't triggered by a user, it automatically stops it.
That sounds like a really good idea. Yeah.
It of course it's still in research phase, so we won't see it on SSDs anytime soon. But I think it's a great idea to have something hardware based that's outside of the OS.
Yeah.
And if it realizes, hey, this wasn't triggered by a user, and there's a lot of encryption going on, I'm going to stop this.
Yeah, I don't know why it would have to go through a lot of research. I think a lot of people would like to buy that right now, even if it's not perfect.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, yeah. All right. And Kaitlyn and Liz are not with us today. So we'll go back to Alan, who has the LA cops.
Yes, according to the Register, among others, the LA Police Department is actively harvesting social media information from not necessarily people it arrests, just people that they interact with or people that they stop. This apparently is according to the Brennan Center of Justice, which is an institute within New York University. And they received this thanks to a Freedom of Information filing. And so apparently, at least in 2020, the LA Police Department administration told all of its officers to collect all social media information from people it interacted with, not necessarily to access the contents of those accounts, but at least to find out the handles, the account names of everyone it stopped with. And so it's not entirely clear what they were trying to accomplish with this, other than trying to build up social media networks. In other words, to understand how people were connected on social media. And of course, there is nothing wrong or illegal with socializing with people on social media, but apparently this was a larger effort to figure out what the social relationships.
Well, at first I had the usual reaction that they're invading your privacy, and then I'm beginning to take more of the fascist position here, as usual. I mean, in a way, this is just the modern knowing who you are, like your social security number or something. Your social media handle is usually not a secret. And by the way, it's usually pretty easy to find. They're going to take a picture of you anyway. So they could pretty quickly figure out which one of the people with your name you are. And of course, the point is, if they arrest you and then you have a record, they arrest you like 5 times, they figure out you're probably in a gang, they want to see who else is in the gang. I can see lots of legitimate law enforcement value here.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that's not necessarily how it's being used. And in fact, according to some of these documents, it shows that they're very specifically targeting people who are involved in protests, political protests, and social movements. So Black Lives Matter, anti-Trump rallies,
Yeah.
and left political activity.
Well, yes, but I mean, in principle, they could be targeting the right political activity, which I think is where they need to be.
Yes, but that's not what they're doing.
Right.
No, you're right. It's like that proton mail story where, in principle, they could catch like pedophiles or terrorists, but what they're really going after is environmental activists.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this
That's
is,
that's the good old LAPD.
yeah,
yeah,
well, yeah. And they're also feeding it into their Palantir subscription.
yeah. Well, I
So,
remember I offended some of the people in my extended family because they were police. And so when I talked to them, I said, well, I suppose you guys support Trump. And they were horrified. And I said, well, I thought most cops did, cops and military, because I think it's true. They mostly do.
well, this is how it's being used in the LAPD. I mean,
Yeah,
regardless of how one feels about Trump or the political views of many law enforcement officers, the fact of the matter is that it's being used against people who are engaged in legal, constitutionally protected activities.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay. Now, this is that's the eternal battle. The cops want to know everything. They would like to monitor all the internet, know all the email, know all the phone calls, have your location. And, they could actually benefit. Some law enforcement benefit would come out of that, along with a little bit of privacy invasion. And who cares about that? Anyway. All right. And speaking of which, a really amazing article in the Washington Post about Xi Jinping. He is really going to be the new Mao. I didn't know it had gotten this bad, but my Chinese friends say they're trying to figure out how to get their kids to flee the country and stuff because they're very afraid we're going to have another cultural revolution, and it looks like it. Not only did he decide to extend himself beyond the legal number of terms so he can just stay in power, he silenced and removed from the internet and everywhere actors that he didn't like, so they've just vanished totally in all their work. He imposed that they must not let kids play video games. They must get rid of effeminate men in TV series. They must change the plots of stories and TV shows and stuff to be more patriotic. And they've pretty much squashed all the major tech companies that were going to get rich, and all the owners, founders of them have sort of vanished. They're not going to let them have any economic power, and on it goes. And on top of that, remember, Mao had this little red book of his sayings that people had to learn like a holy book. And Xi Jinping now has his Xi Jinping thought book that people have to like memorize and teach in school and stuff. So it's very, very much like the Cultural Revolution all again. And this is kind of where you got a point about the cops abusing the information. In China, the Communist Party really has the power to like shove you around, and that's how they use it. So, and he restricted the private tutoring industry, which is how Andrew Yang made his money, saying there will be no more private tutoring because it's too expensive for the parents, but the parents still want their kids to succeed on the tests. So there's like a black market private tutoring where you sneak to get your kids illegal teaching in like math and stuff.
Oh, so you mean how we do our classes?
Well, that's true. Now that you mention it, it does amount to the same thing. This is an issue that we all face. Is in fact all of us that are currently teaching college have to find some way to subvert the will of our administration that tries to strangle all the good out of our class, and we find some way to sneakily, secretly teach good stuff despite the administration that wants to choke the life out of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and this I think is fundamental. This is preparation for cybersecurity work in industry, because your entire life is going to be trying to do something that your boss cannot understand and doesn't want to let you do. So communicating with non-technical people is like the most difficult part of the job in many ways. Anyway, and they're also, of course, crushing all dissent and protest in Hong Kong. China is definitely going to a scary place. At the same time, a whole lot of people in America, like Bloomberg News and a bunch of Republicans, are all trying to gin up Americans to be ready for like a war with China, to be angry at China. So it's looking like there's going to be some pretty serious contest between America and China coming up. China gets more and more provocative. Anyway, and then Irvin's got the OWASP top 10. Go ahead.
Yes, OWASP top 10. They haven't updated this since 2017. Mm-hmm. This is a draft for the world to see. Things have changed. injection is no longer at the top of the food chain. It
No.
actually got merged into number 7, identification and authentication failures. At
Well,
the top of the food chain now will be broken access control.
yeah.
Apparently that has moved up from 5th to
Oh,
1st.
this is what I've been telling students for years. The data used to be stolen by SQL injection. Now it's open Amazon buckets.
Yeah.
That's what that is. Okay.
Yes, that's exactly what that is.
Okay.
Yeah, and then number 2 now is cryptographic failures, which have moved up a spot from 2017. And injection will be number 3, and so on. The list goes. There's 3 new ones, and some of them are really a joining of a few others from the past. It's interesting to see now how things have changed from 2017 to today.
I wonder what they mean by cryptographic failures, that it should be number 2 more important than injection. That must mean we all know about it. But mostly, I'm aware there's no encryption at all, no access control at all. What is the bad encryption?
So they say failures related to cryptography, which often lead to sensitive data exposure or system compromise.
So, but that implies that there is some huge problem with stuff being encrypted, but being encrypted badly, so people succeed in decrypting it. And I don't hear about that. That's not anywhere up there with like SQL injection or open buckets.
I mean, that could also be not using HTTPS.
Well,
That could be a failure of, or doing like self-signed certificates.
well, sure, but those don't even belong in the top 10 because in principle, even though they're common, they don't actually lead to data exposure hardly ever. I mean, those are just like failures of best practice. In fact, they do not open a hole that a person can get through very easily. I mean,
Ha.
HTTP does, but almost nobody uses HTTP anymore.
So from the description, is
Mhm.
any data transmitted in clear text?
Oh, they call that cryptographic failure.
Yes.
Well,
Are there any older weak cryptographic algorithms used by default in older code? Are default crypto keys in use? Weak crypto keys generated or reused? Encryption not enforced? Does
okay.
the user agent not verify the
Okay.
received service certificate is valid?
Okay. Well, if they're counting no encryption at all, then I'm with them. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I understand. Okay. Fair enough.
That's the number 2.
Okay. No encryption at all, calling that a cryptographic failure, I might object to the language. But anyway, all right.
That's just semantics.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, good. Anyway, all right. And then Alan's got location data.
Location data and more state surveillance of location data. This time, the Illinois Department of Transportation, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has determined that the IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation, purchased geolocation data of about 40% of the Illinois state population from a company called SafeGraph that is a specialized data broker, a data broker that has been banned from Google's App Store for shady dealings. And apparently IDOT paid only $50,000 for 2 years worth of data of raw location data based on people's cell phone pings, cell phone activity. And each of these
$50,000, right?
Pardon?
$50,000, right?
Yeah, only $50,000.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this is over 50 million data points from more than 5 million active users.
Yeah.
And it only cost $50,000 for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And this data includes coordinates, latitude and longitude, timestamp, the device type, and a device identifier that's supposedly anonymized, but wouldn't be too hard to de-anonymize if somebody put 2 and 2 together. And IDOT is saying that it didn't actually process the data directly because they probably lack the capabilities to do that well. And so instead they outsourced that to a third party to analyze the data for them. Now, unlike the last story, this is not nominally being used by law enforcement. Instead, IDOT is supposedly just using it to better understand travel activity throughout the state of Illinois.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with the Illinois Department of Transportation trying to better understand travel behavior in the state. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's their job, after all. But the issue here is how they're going about it. And in particular, the company that they're using to get this information. And SafeGraph, it was banned by Google because, well, the whole industry is shady, but they were especially egregious. And so the fact that IDOT is paying money, good money, to a company that has a very bad track record really does not reflect well on IDOT. And the fact that they're propping up a shady organization, certainly not at all ethical.
Well, this has come out several times. Like every app on your phone is reporting your location back to the home base, and they're just selling that.
Right.
Like I remember the one a few months ago where Papa John's closed on Sunday, and they wanted to know where people go on Sunday when their store is closed to eat their pizza, and their app is still telling you where you go, so they can answer that question. And I think there was somebody recently, one of the Republican people said, people are saying they're worried about a 5G chip in the vaccine, and you're all carrying a cell phone. So just shut up about it. You're all letting everybody track you anyway, which is true.
Line, yes. And
yeah,
you were just talking about the situation in China.
Yeah.
And in China, it might be an authoritarian government that's surveilling everybody. But in the US, we just have corporate surveillance.
We do.
So it's the same thing, surveillance, but there are just different types of entities that are performing the surveillance and to possibly different ends.
Well, and that's the point of the Bill of Rights. I mean, if Google tracks everything I do, Google can't send a cop to arrest me. So it's not as important if Google knows everything I do. At least that's the idea.
Well, that's the idea. Yes, that's right. But we're still being surveilled.
Well, sure, but we technically agreed to it. I mean, I could go to the Google opt-out village, and live in a woods and grow my own plants and eat that,
Yes, well, in Europe, it would not be legal necessarily.
Yeah, in Europe, that's right. And to a little bit, maybe not in California, although that doesn't really seem to be having much effect.
No.
Yeah, well, okay. And then I've got the new superconducting magnet from MIT or phys.org. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have as much technical data as I'd like, but fusion energy is really leaping ahead. And now the new magnet is making a much stronger magnetic field than any such magnet, thanks to using high temperature superconductors, which is very interesting. But one thing missing from this article is how high is that high temperature? And I kind of suspect that it's not all that high, like not room temperature, but probably just higher than previous supercooled things, which still would make it a lot cheaper. But anyway, I'm reading a lot of exciting stuff about fusion power. I think we're really going to have fusion power plants soon, like within 5 or 10 years. And that would be enormously valuable because we're all dying from the poison that gas and oil and coal-fired plants are putting in the air. And yet, if we want to have our modern technology, we really need a lot of power. And so fusion would be a really big contributor to large amounts of clean power. So I'm glad to see it. And Facebook with their camera glasses.
Yes, Facebook has decided to forget the past, forget history.
It was the Google glasses, right?
Yes.
They totally failed over and over. Nobody liked these horrible things.
Yes, Facebook is doing the exact same thing.
Well, they're making it look better, which is actually, I think, the main complaint.
Yes. So Google made their own glasses completely. Facebook decided to team up with Ray-Bans.
This sounds like a good plan. I mean, people love Ray-Bans.
People do love Ray-Bans. So this camera thing, or these lenses, the Google Glasses Part 2, they work with Facebook, so you can talk to it. It's not as smart as like the Google Assistant. It can take pictures, but your phone camera is still better. It has speakers, but anybody can hear. Like it's supposed to be here so that you hear it, but it's loud enough that anybody in your area can hear. It is always on. Hooray!
But the part I thought was surprising is it cannot project onto the screen, so you can't see the output.
Right, there's no projection.
So what is, the original point was you would walk around, look at somebody, and like RoboCop, their criminal history will scroll right by.
Yeah, no.
And if it can't do that, then what's the point of recording everything if you can't see it?
To record, to be weird, to be creepy, I guess.
Well, that doesn't seem like a big market to me. I mean, the other one, where it would like give you helpful information about everything you see, seemed useful.
That does seem useful, but this is not that at all. It's just sunglasses with camera, microphone, and speakers, and connected to Facebook.
So I guess the whole point is so you can live stream your whole life on Facebook.
And that's the funny thing is it can't really live stream. It can do videos in a couple sections, like a little shorts.
Is it just storing it locally, or is it just Bluetoothing it to your phone?
Bluetoothing it.
Then why is there a limit?
I don't know.
I have a lot of questions. But the main question is why? What is the value of this for an average person that just wants a toy to play with? What is it you can do with this that you couldn't do with your phone?
Nothing. You could do all these things with your phone.
Yeah, I think this is much less like the Google glasses and a lot more like the failed Snapchat glasses of a few years ago.
I never even heard of them.
Yeah. That was a very failed product from Snapchat that allowed you to do basically the same thing. And they even had a vending machine selling them at Westfield in downtown San Francisco.
Wow.
Westfield Mall.
I think the difference between the three is this one looks more like regular pair of glasses.
Yeah, they're a little slicker.
Yeah.
Smaller. Yeah. But I mean, there's still no good use for it.
No.
That
For
hasn't changed.
at least 5 years, I've been hearing that wearables are the future if anybody can make a good one. And so a lot of people seem to like the Apple Watch. They seem to say, this is really cool. Now it buzzes and I can see that I got a text message or something.
Yes.
But all the other wearables people have made have just totally flopped because, they're sort of big and clumsy and they don't really do anything that justifies bothering to wear it all the time. But I think what everybody says is whenever somebody makes a good wearable, they're going to make a pile of money. One thing I would like, is something that monitors your heart rate and everything. Something that automatically like calls the hospital if you get hit by a car or something, that sort of thing.
That Apple Watch may be that.
Yeah, I think the Apple Watch does provide some of that. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, I guess that's it for this one. And what is it? Friday, we'll be back on Tuesday morning. Farewell.